This episode contains explicit content, such as physical violence and domestic abuse, as well as other explicit comments that may not be suitable for all audiences. Listener discretion is advised. This podcast episode is for informational purposes only and does not constitute psychological, medical, legal, or professional advice. The speakers in this episode are not psychological professionals, and the opinions and comments by them are solely for entertainment purposes. Items discussed in this episode include information provided in emails by an incarcerated individual and has not been verified through research, and the speakers are commenting on what is reflected in those emails. Welcome to this episode of Criminology Chats, the podcast where we dive deep into the world of crime, justice, and everything in between. I'm your host, J.R. Rainbolt. Today we're tackling a fascinating yet tragic case, one that raises difficult questions about evidence, justice, and the complexities of the human psyche. Chatting about the case with me today is Alahna McCarron. Alahna, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, JR. I'm a recent graduate of the Chicago School. I majored in criminology with a minor in forensic psychology. I became interested in criminology because of the intersection of behavior, law, and the search for truth. I've always been fascinated by how things work, and learning about criminal behavior and understanding the why behind it is just extremely interesting to me. Being offered this opportunity has been wonderful. I am so excited to dive in.
This is part one of a two-part series about the disturbing case of Army Sergeant James T. Murphy. Murphy was convicted by military court-martial in December 1987 for the premeditated murder of his wife Petra Murphy and his 5-year-old stepson and his 1-year-old biological son, all of which occurred in August 1987 in then West Germany.
Let's imagine that it's 1987 in West Germany. The Cold War is in full swing. We're in a tense standoff. Sergeant Murphy is stationed in Hanau, West Germany, a crucial post helping to deter the Russian and East German threat. There, Murphy meets and marries a German citizen named Petra. She already has a son from a previous relationship, but soon after, Petra and Murphy have another son, James Murphy Jr. Our story today is about a marriage that took a dark and tragic turn. At first, things were going great for Petra and James, but over time, their relationship began to deteriorate. Months before the tragic events, Petra and James were amid a divorce proceeding in the German court system. But that did not stop Murphy from moving on. In June of 1987, he married another German citizen named Beat. After their wedding, Murphy and Beat left Germany and headed to North Carolina in July of that same year. While there, Murphy, through a lawyer, supposedly obtained a divorce from Petra on the grounds of a 1-year separation. In August of 1987, Murphy received military orders requiring him to transfer to Redstone Arsenal, Alabama. Meanwhile, Petra and their 2 children were not seen by people that she normally saw on a daily or weekly basis. So the bodies of Petra and her 2 sons were discovered on August 23rd when Petra's pastor went to her apartment to check on her after she had missed several church activities. He then noticed an unusual odor and reported his findings to the German police.
That is something, he knew he was married to one lady, then he marries another one. Okay,
In today's world, that would not fly.
We have been communicating with Mr. Murphy. Alahna is the primary person that's been communicating with him through emails because he's still incarcerated in the federal penitentiary, and they wouldn't allow us to do any type of video, audio, or phone calls. So it's all been done through emails. And I think we had a plethora of emails, but we will give you quotes from those as we can throughout this episode, and hopefully you'll enjoy some of the things that he says, and we'll hopefully show you how his background and some of his twisted mentality kind of is in this particular case. We'll be focusing on his childhood, the traumas in his childhood, and things that he endured. And again, where necessary, we'll share the quotes from his emails. So we'll just dive in here. Murphy grew up in Clinton, North Carolina, not to be confused with President Clinton city and the county seat of Sampson County, North Carolina, with a population of about 8,500 in 2020 census. Now, he was born back in the early 60s. The town got its name from Revolutionary War Brigadier General Richard Clinton of the North Carolina Militia in the American Revolution. Let's start by painting a picture of Murphy's early family life And it sounds like it was quite complex and he endured a lot. Isn't that correct, Alana?
It was indeed. His upbringing was troubling. So, according to Murphy's own accounts, he had a very large sibling, a very large family, 11 siblings in total. But his family was split. So, only four of his siblings actually lived with him and his mother, but seven of them resided with his father in a separate household. So, his mother was his primary caregiver during his childhood in Clinton. So, a fragmented family structure already creates a sense of instability. But it goes deeper than that, doesn't it? There are some incredibly difficult details surrounding his birth.
Yeah, that is correct. And having 11 children, oh my goodness here. And I know that we spoke earlier and you said you'd like to have a soccer team.
Yeah.
So,
No.
oh, I was wrong. I misunderstood. Oh, okay.
Oh
Uh,
yeah. Two max would be great.
okay. Like I said, my wife and I, we had three and that was, we were outnumbered. So I can tell you that it's tough. But anyway, so a couple of things here. One is we want to make sure that we tell our listeners about things that we feel is important to what he later did. And the details are crucial to understanding the potential impact on his development. So he revealed that before he was born, his mother actually attempted to abort him due to the family's precarious financial situation. I know there's some people out there and some listeners is going to go, hey, that's not, oh my goodness, how could that be? But in fact, back in those days in the early 60s, having a large family was not sometimes financially sound. So there's a lot of things that happened to get rid of children and things of that nature back then. So anyway, let's talk a little bit about that, Alana. Tell me what you found out.
Yeah, I mean, can't even imagine that. So it was a shock to me when that came across my email. I was kind of taken aback by it. JR, do you know what that attempt involved?
Yeah, I know he said in one of his emails that his mother drank a concoction of gunpowder and castor oil. That, of course, is very extremely dangerous, especially when you're pregnant to drink something like that. But again, I want to tell our listeners out there, Alana, that that's not something unusual. I am, as you could probably tell with a little twang in my voice, I am from the South, was raised there, early childhood and into early adulthood, but that's not unusual to hear of folks and women doing that at that time in the South. So tell us what the effects of that could be on a pregnant lady.
Yeah, so the effects of such a concoction of gunpowder and castor oil during pregnancy can be devastating. Obviously, in Murphy's mother's case, she wanted to get rid of him and she didn't. So this could have had a large effect on Murphy growing up and even as a baby. So he claims to have suffered cognitive issues as a result of this attempted abortion. And the use of gunpowder most likely would have caused this harm to his brain development.
Yeah, and beyond that abortion attempt, there are other challenges that he faced, including his mother's struggle with alcohol consumption. Is that right?
That is right. So Murphy stated that his mother was an alcoholic and drank excessively even while she was pregnant with him. So, I mean, this would have further compounded the potential developmental issues he faced because fetal alcohol exposure can lead to a range of physical, behavioral, and cognitive problems. But I also want to jump back real quick, JR, and
Okay.
just talk about that it wasn't something that he was told as a child. He
No,
didn't
that,
learn
that
about this until his trial. And I
yeah.
mean, finding out this information probably added another layer of complexity to understanding both himself and the relationship that he thought he had with his mother.
Yeah, that is true. I mean, could you imagine at trial for premeditated murder, you learned that your mother tried to abort you, man? That would just
Yeah,
be, to me, that would just be an added like bam on you.
that would be the icing on the cake.
The other thing that we talked about and he did in his emails was the fact that there were allegations of abuse as well. And of course, that along with this failed abortion attempt, that's deeply troubling to a start of life, wouldn't you say so?
I do agree. I think that that would really, really stink. And according to Murphy, his mother punished him, but he even described it as going beyond typical discipline. He characterized it as abuse, possibly stemming from the fact that she herself was a battered woman. And I mean, this cycle of violence can often lead to inappropriate and harmful parenting behaviors.
Exactly. But nowadays, though, Pete, you can get in trouble.
Definitely.
You can get in trouble if you physically discipline sometimes your children, which I don't know if it's good or bad, but I know that, you want to protect those youngsters. They have to rely on you for protection. So I think that maybe is a good thing. But anyway, let's talk a little bit about the fact that this paints a grim picture of his childhood, all this stuff going on. And let's try to focus on some specifics. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the things Murphy observed or experienced as a child, specifically under the age of 10, that might be considered particularly traumatic or informative for this case?
Yeah, absolutely. So, some key observations under the age of 10 that he could have faced, and some that he did, in fact, face, as he told us in his emails. One of the top ones was the whole financial instability issue within his household. This would have created a constant sense of insecurity and stress, both in himself and in his family. Another would be experiencing inconsistent parenting due to his mother's alcohol consumption and her emotional state. So this lack of stability can actually impact a child's attachment style and their emotional regulation. So if they don't have that kind of contact parents, they won't be able to regulate their emotions like the rest of us, which is extremely hard. Another one, witnessing or being subjected to violence within the home. Given that the allegations on his mother was that she was a battered woman, this probably led to his exposure of domestic violence, which is incredibly damaging to children. I think it's overlooked. It was definitely overlooked a lot back then, not so much now. As JR said, you can't really raise your hand to a kid now without somebody getting involved. Another was feeling a lack of emotional security. I mean, with a split family, an alcoholic mother, and potential abuse, Murphy likely struggled to form secure attachments with his caregivers, and this probably moved forward into his teen years and his adult years with forming relationships with other people. And even the last one, living with a secret, the attempted abortion. Even if he didn't know about it consciously, this tension and unspoken history within his family could have created a sense of unease and distrust. I mean, his mother knew that she tried to do this and he didn't. So she could have resented him from the minute he was born.
Yeah, that's true. I think probably she may have done that, because if she tried to get rid of him before he was born, then after he was born, and she had to maintain 4 of those kids of the 11 and 7 went to the father, maybe she did have some resentment there. And these things that you discussed there are incredibly significant factors, I think, in later in life in some of the things about what he did. And it's clear that his early years were filled with adversity and trauma. We'll delve deeper into how these experiences might have shaped growing up, how he is later growing up on Jacob Street there where he lived in Clinton. Murphy witnessed a disturbing pattern, men abusing their girlfriends and wives. And I think that played a big part too, right? Because as we know, research says, hey, look, when you witness that, he's had all these, what I call the big combination of things that would not put him on a good path, abuse, secret about him, trying to be aborted, alcohol when she was pregnant, alcohol consumption there, witnessing all these type of violent acts. In some of the correspondence there, tell us what some of the things he said that occurred to him or what he witnessed when he lived on Jacob Street.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm going to pull some quotes from his actual emails. And he said, I quote, "I was literally in a Nightmare on Elm Street movie. I've never seen so much violence against women than the years that I lived on Jacob Street." He said that the sounds of the abuse were inescapable. And he recounted one instance listening from the back porch of his cousin's house as his cousin beat his girlfriend inside. So I can't even imagine hearing that at his age. So I'll quote him again. "The cries of 'please stop' were unbearable as I stood outside the house on the back porch." Jacob Street was a constant barrage of violence. The toxicity of that environment permeated every aspect of Mr. Murphy's life from that moment forward. Everything in my life was being affected by this toxic environment where I lived on Jacob Street. But the violence wasn't just something that he witnessed. He didn't just see it. It was something that he experienced firsthand. These were all his family members that were doing this.
Right. And, in his correspondence there, and one thing that we did learn about this when we did research on the case was he claimed his mother was disciplinarian, but later said she was very physically abusive towards him. He said she would use abuse towards him because he witnessed her being abused, so she thought that was normal. And that's very common, whenever you're battered, you tend to do the same to your children. And Murphy alleges also that his mother beat him with switches until she drew blood, okay? And so he referred to that as what? bloodlust. I mean, I can't imagine that. She used extension cords, belts, whatever she could get her hands on. And I quote him, she even threw a hammer at me once. Oh man, she would often wait until I was in bed with my underwear and t-shirt on to beat me. And those were the most painful beatings he says he endured. And that's what he quoted in one of his emails. And another thing he said in one of his emails is, please don't get it twisted. I love my mom. And even though I could not understand as a kid why she beat me that way, I now understand why she did that, because she was battered and what I consider the battered women's syndrome. She was definitely going through that. But back then, they didn't really know much about that or care about that, unfortunately. And he realized that the battered women do not always seek out safety, and they end up abusing their children, just as boys who witnessed it growing up tend to turn into abusers. So I think he's given some self-understanding and reflection on why maybe he was the way he was. So
Yeah, I definitely agree.
oh, well, let me back up and say this. I want to advise everybody that neither Alana or myself are clinical psychologists or psychiatrists. So, we can't give you any official opinions here, and we're not, but we can give you just our 2 cents worth. And our research in this case reveals studies that show strong association between childhood exposure to domestic violence and the likelihood of perpetrating violence in adulthood, including intimate partner violence. So a lot of us probably already know that. And one of the theories that I want to throw out there is the social learning theory developed by Canadian-American psychologist Albert Bandura. He suggests that children learn behaviors including aggression by observing and imitating the actions of those around them, particularly same-gender role models. And I can tell you that from my children to my grandchildren, at an early age, they start to mimic their parents. You know what I'm saying? And so that shows that a social learning theory is involved in some of that in early childhood.
I do agree. So I think we're going to switch kind of gears now into the whole sexual activity that Murphy faced in his young years. So Murphy actually claimed that the young girls in his neighborhood were affected by these violent acts because they became sexually active at 6 and 7 years old, and the young boys did as well. So he was exposed to pornography at this age, at this 6 or 7 years old. Murphy said in one of his emails that his first sexual experience was when he was about 6 years old in the bathroom of his house with a girl that was 5 years old, which blows my mind that kids that age are even experiencing or thinking about that kind of stuff.
Oh, I just want to interject here that I don't know if I believe that or not. I got to tell you, I don't know if I even remember anything I did at 5 years old, okay, or 6 years old right now, maybe seven, but
Yeah.
I don't know about you. What about at 5? Do you remember anything from 5?
I mean, there was very little that I remembered from that age. So there are a few times in here that when he sent out the email, I was kind of like, I don't know if I believe that. And this was one of them
Yeah.
because 5 or 6 years old, if you look at Erik Erikson's developmental theory, I mean, it just doesn't fit. It doesn't make sense. But JR and I asked him how he knew about sex at that age. And he said that it was because of the magazines he saw in his house and by peeping at some of the movies when the adults would be watching those kinds of movies at his neighbor's house. So this sexual experience happened because his 7-year-old brother was having sex with her and let him join in. Let's think about this. His 7-year-old brother was having sex with a 5-year-old. Where are the parents?
Exactly.
Where
Exactly.
is the little girl's parents? I mean, baffled me again. And he's 7 and he's like, hey, 6-year-old brother, come have sex with this 5-year-old girl with me.
Yeah, and I wonder what their definition of sex was back then.
Right. I mean,
We can't say to our listeners that he never really answered that question for us or anything as to what sex meant to him at that age. I think he did once refer to it as intercourse, but again, maybe he was talking about just hugging
yeah,
or
right.
kissing.
Like,
We don't know, right? At that
oh,
age, what that meant. But anyway,
so I'll quote him. He actually said, the girls my age had sex on a regular and often spoke about it and would ask me to have sex with them and other boys. They had sex quite often. I do not know where they learned this from. I do not know if they were sexually abused, but all the indicators are there from everything. I've read about girls being promiscuous at that young age. I don't think I've ever read anything
I,
that said a 5-year-old girl was willingly having sex.
yeah, I don't either.
Well, I don't know. But in another one of his emails, he said that even though he was having sex, and I quote, I tended to shy away from girls. And he claimed it was the girls or young women that asked him to have sex, but he didn't want to be in a relationship with a woman because of the abuse he witnessed. He even added that he would break up with a girl if they were in a relationship without telling her why. He would just
Yeah.
up and leave if he didn't want it anymore.
It almost seemed a little bit like he was blaming the girls for the fact that he was having sex with them at that
Yes,
age, that he was
it,
blaming the
it
girls.
does, and it seems like he almost pinned it on his neighbors and the adults
Right.
because he saw those movies.
Now, I can say that, if he was exposed to, I guess, a lot of the peeping in on the adult movies or witnessing sex acts between adults or young teens, maybe that possibly, and I think research does probably support that, yeah, that could have some impact at that age of 5, 6, or 7 years old. In the emails that he sent, some of the stuff he says, both Alana and I were like, okay, he's saying it, but you just have to, as they say, take it with a little bit of grain of salt, so to speak, I
Mhm.
think. The other thing that Murphy said he experienced was head trauma, traumatic brain injury type of situations in his childhood and early adulthood. And some of the things that he told us about was the fact that he experienced multiple head injuries as a child because he was back then what they call clumsy and fell a lot. He was never taken to a hospital afterwards. And again, that goes back to that fact that probably financially they didn't have insurance and stuff like that back then, and they couldn't afford possibly to pay for the medical treatment. But once he gave us one type of situation in particular where he was playing basketball. He went up for a rebound and his legs collapsed and he fell to the floor. And another player fell on his head, smashed it to the floor. He said it was the loudest sound that he had ever heard inside of his head. And we all know probably he may have suffered then from a severe concussion, but according to him, he wasn't taken to the hospital. And of course, it was after this incident that he says he began to have some headaches. Okay. Now, later as a teenager, he fell down steps, hitting his head again and passed out. He was not treated for that incident either, according to him. He claimed that while there, he passed out about a week before basic training, too, after he enlisted in the military. And while in basic training, fell down some stairs, hitting his head again. So he is, if these stories are true, then he is giving information about suffering from what we call traumatic brain injuries. And studies show that individuals with a history of TBI, especially in childhood, are at a higher risk of developing aggressive and antisocial behaviors. And that's well established now. So TBI can lead to changes in cognitive function, emotional regulation, and personality, potentially resulting in irritability, impulsivity, and difficulty controlling aggressive impulses. So yeah, so I think maybe that if in those are in fact true, that this could have, again, impacted him and some of the issues that happened to him later on. Now, this brings us to where we're going to talk a little bit about his enlistment in the Army. He enlisted in the Army in 1981, okay, with what was called then a delayed entry program. And what I mean by that is you could enlist in the Army, like, say, for example, in March of 1981, and you didn't go to your actual training until maybe March of 1982. So you could do a delayed entry up to a year. So that's what he did, and he waited until July of 1982 to attend his Army training. And he first went to basic training. Now, basic training is about 10 weeks, 8 weeks, depending. And that's just where you learn how to be in the military, learn how to be a soldier, if you will, learn the basics of shooting firearms and things of that nature. Very basic stuff. And then your specific job that you signed up for is the training you go to after that, okay, if you successfully complete that. Now, again, he claims that during his basic training, he fell down some stairs hitting his head, which again could be a TBI issue. He did not elaborate on that in the emails, though. And after finishing basic training, he was sent to Fort Eustis, Virginia for some additional training. While there, he claims that he started to struggle, but kept it to himself. He never said what he struggled at Fort Eustis or what he struggled with. But then in one of his emails, though, Alana, he did say, I abused myself sexually. And he went on to say, by having sex with girls that were not very clean. I contacted some urinary tract infections, crabs, and yeast infection. Looks like he was a party animal at Fort Eustis, too, because he said he drank and partied a lot to cover up his pain, according to his emails. And I never really elaborated on what pain he was covering up for. I don't know if it was for the headaches of the TBIs or if it was just, I don't know. What do you
Yeah.
think? Do you think it was any? I don't know.
I think it could have been a mixture of things. I think it might have been his headaches and this struggling that he mentions about Fort Eustis, but doesn't ever actually dive into. And I think another thing that he might have drank to hide was the crabs and yeast infections and UTIs. But little did he know, and probably I don't know how good medical medicine was back then, but I mean, drinking actually makes urinary tract infections worse.
Worse, exactly. Yeah.
So, I
So,
mean, that
yeah.
probably didn't help him very much.
No. And one of the things that he pointed out in the military about the military was that the military kept it kind of secret because at the time Army people were encouraged to drink, causing most young men to become alcoholics. And then the Army, as Murphy said in one of his emails, would throw them under the bus and kick them out of the service for being a drunk. Well, I can say that back then I think it was encouraged to some degree to drink in the army back then, because at the time we were still in what they call the Cold War. So service members were training always, wondering about the fact that, they would go to war, die. And so, to keep their morale up, unfortunately, they kind of promoted the partying type of scene a little bit. So, but I also thought that this comment that he made was very interesting. What he said about drinking, and I quote, "I drank heavily with my friends, even though I didn't like it, because you're considered a wimp if you don't drink. I've seen so many soldiers' careers destroyed because of this tradition, and no one cared." So, don't know here. Okay.
I don't know there either.
And he also talked about an incident, Alana, where he got intoxicated. And won't you tell us about that he told us about it for, I believe,
Oh,
Fort Use there.
yeah. I mean, once you hear it'll probably make you question some things too. So he told us about this incident when he was intoxicated with his girlfriend at the time. He said that her name was Pam, and I'm going to quote him. "Once when I was under the influence, I blacked out when Pam argued with me. The next thing I knew was my hands were around her throat." And a pause right there before I keep going. JR, I don't know if you've ever blacked out while drinking, but do you remember anything that happened after you blacked out?
No,
Right. So I mean, I'm a little confused there because he said he blacked out and then he remembers his hands around her neck. So was he really blacked out or was he trying to pin this anger on the alcohol?
exactly. Exactly.
That's where I'm at
Yeah.
here.
I can just tell you that in my college days, the next day, your friends would tell you what you did if you blacked out. You wouldn't remember what you did, you
Yeah,
know, and,
people did in the morning.
but anyway, there you
Yeah,
go.
so anyway, as the quote keeps going, he said, "I began to stay away from her after that incident. Another time," so he didn't stay away from her, I'm assuming. "Another time, I kicked Pam out of bed onto the floor." And then he said, "What had I become?" I thought to myself. "Had my past caught up with me? Am I becoming the violence I witnessed as a kid?" What do you think about that, JR?
Yeah, here's what I think about that. I think that's bollocks. But anyway, the bottom line is he didn't realize that the violent, like he witnessed as a kid, when he had his hands around her throat, but he kicks her out of bed, and that's when he has the realization. Hmm.
Yeah, it's kind of a
I'm I'm a little
weird
confused
realization.
about that.
Me too. I was as well. So then he
Yeah.
continued on and said, "I was scared and stopped dating for a long time. My military friends just continued to encourage me to drink, which suppressed all the horror I witnessed. I even spoke to my supervisors who offered me little guidance. My relationship with Pam declined after those incidents, and I became depressed because I did not like who I was becoming. I did not see any way out, so I drank and started staying away from her and just dated girls that I knew I would not become attached to."
Yeah. So that means it's probably okay to abuse them because he wasn't becoming attached to them, maybe. I don't know.
Right. I mean, that's kind of where I was thinking. Like, so he drank. He knew that he got violent when he drank, but he stayed away from girls that he was attracted to because if
Yeah.
he was attracted to them, he might feel some sort of remorse for hitting
Right,
them.
exactly. So maybe that's why he didn't want to be
Right.
attracted to him or have a relationship with him. It's okay to maybe go out and date him and, love him and leave him type of thing, or
Yeah,
whatever.
but
Yeah.
he didn't want to be attached to them. And I wonder if that stems from when he was a kid. Like he wasn't attached to his mother at all, from what we can tell. So maybe moving forward, he was like, "Oh, I can't become attached. I'm afraid of what will
Right.
happen if I do become afraid. Will she become my mother, this raging alcoholic? And if we have kids, is she going to do what was done to me?
Right, exactly. Yeah, we don't know, right? Because he really didn't answer that. So you guys can see as listeners out there that we've talked a little bit about his upbringing, some of the significant things in his background. We've talked about the alcoholic issues in his life. The fact that right now I would think that everybody would probably make the I guess connection that he is probably an alcoholic by this time in his life too, and that whenever he consumes a lot of alcohol and is involved in any type of argument or anything like that, he tends to lash out, it looks like, just again based on what we research of the case and everything. And by showing and by talking to you all and telling you about this case and the head injuries, alcohol consumptions, it kind of shows a pattern of his behavior, which hopefully you will be able to see played a major part in the murders, if you will. And we're going to talk about that in our next episode, which will be part 2 of this case. And we thank you for listening to this episode about the case of Sergeant James T. Murphy. Thank you, Alahna, for being here on this one. And I look forward to talking with you on the next one.
I'm excited for it.
Criminology Chats is brought to you by the Chicago School. For more information about the institution, please visit www.thechicagoschool.edu. This podcast is produced and edited by A.M. Peters with additional post services provided by Audio Photo Synthesis. I'd like to give a special shout out to her because if it wasn't for her, this episode and all episodes would not be possible. So thank you so much, Amy. I'm J.R. Rainbolt, your host, and I eagerly anticipate you listening to our next episode. Be safe out there.
The views and perspectives shared in these recordings are intended solely for informational purposes and do not reflect the official stance or policies of the speakers or the Chicago School. Any commercial products and manufacturers mentioned are included for informational reasons only and do not imply endorsement or approval by the speakers or the Chicago School.